The sun hung low in the sky, casting an amber glow over the neatly manicured lawns of our suburban neighborhood. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening when I received the unexpected notice from the Homeowners Association, HOA. With trembling hands, I opened the letter to discover their audacious claim. A portion of my cherished backyard was now deemed community property, all under the pretext of an obscure clause buried deep within the neighborhood's founding documents. They were proposing a community park project, one that would require me to relinquish part of my land. Their arrogance was staggering, and I felt a wave of disbelief wash over me. As I scanned the letter, my heart raced. The HOA demanded compliance, bluntly threatening legal action if I refused. It was a gross overreach, and it ignited a fire within me. I was more than just a homeowner. I was an heir to one of the state's largest fortunes, with the means and resources to fight back against this blatant attempt at extortion. Little did they know, I had entire legal teams on retainer, equipped to dismantle their fabricated claims and protect what was rightfully mine. The next day, I attended the HOA meeting with a mix of resolve and indignation. The atmosphere buzzed with whispered conspiracies as board members and their cronies conferred in hushed tones. It became glaringly apparent that this community vote they had called was nothing more than a charade, orchestrated to fool unsuspecting residents. Only select friends of the board were clued in, while many homeowners remained blissfully unaware of the real agenda. Initial intimidation tactics quickly followed. A member of the HOA cornered me after the meeting, voice tight with menace, as he threatened to place a lien on my home if I dared to resist their demands. The implication was clear: comply or lose everything. Fear crept in for a moment, but it was swiftly overshadowed by the conviction to fight. They were underestimating not just my resolve but my resources. I immediately contacted my family's legal team, one renowned for taking down even the most formidable foes. I shared every detail about their intimidation tactics and the dubious clause they cited. As they dove into the research, I began investigating who might be behind this land grab. The truth soon surfaced. A local real estate developer had been scheming in the shadows, bribing HOA board members in hopes of seizing my property for luxurious condominiums. The pieces were falling into place, and my resolve only strengthened. There was no way I would let them take what was rightfully mine. Armed with this knowledge and the formidable expertise of my legal team, I prepared to unleash a counterattack that would shock them to their core. The following week, the HOA scheduled a special meeting, and I knew it was crucial to attend. Their intention became glaringly clear as I observed the hastily organized gathering. This was not an opportunity for all homeowners to voice their opinions, but rather a scripted performance designed to lend legitimacy to their nefarious scheme. As I entered the community center, the atmosphere felt charged, thick with an undercurrent of deceit. The meeting room was filled with familiar faces, but only a select few seemed genuinely engaged in the proceedings. Most attendees were members of the board or close associates who shared a palpable sense of camaraderie, whispering among themselves and exchanging knowing glances. It became evident that this vote was nothing more than a charade, a well-orchestrated ploy to create an illusion of consensus while effectively sidelining anyone who might oppose their plans. As the HOA president called the meeting to order, he presented their argument for converting part of my backyard into community property for a park. He referenced that obscure clause in our founding documents, spinning it with such conviction that even bystanders appeared momentarily convinced. However, his exaggerated rhetoric couldn't obscure the fact that they had deliberately excluded many residents from the discussion, people who would rightfully object to taking away another homeowner's land. I raised my hand, my voice steady despite a growing torrent of anger. What about those of us who weren't notified? How can you justify holding a vote when most homeowners didn't even know this meeting was happening? The room went quiet, save for murmurs among board members. They exchanged uneasy glances but quickly regained composure as the president dismissed my query with arrogance, insisting that those present were representative enough of the community's interests. The tension escalated as the president announced that he would call for a vote on their proposal shortly after delivering his compelling, albeit misleading, speech. It was painfully obvious that any dissent would be swiftly quashed. I noticed several board members interjecting with thinly veiled threats about consequences for noncompliance, warning subtly yet menacingly about potential liens on properties if owners refused to align with the board's decisions. Realizing I needed to counteract this deception effectively, I decided to collect signatures from other affected residents right after the meeting. My gut told me that many felt just as violated by this ploy as I did. They simply lacked the courage to voice their concerns openly. By gathering support, we could collectively challenge the HOA's authority and expose their unethical practices. Steeling myself against their intimidation tactics and emboldened by those around me who were beginning to recognize the truth behind their facade, I knew it was time to take action, not just for my property, but for everyone who deserved a fair fight against corruption hidden behind closed doors. With each passing day, my resolve grew stronger. I would not allow them to steal what was mine without a fight. The day after the HOA meeting, I received an unexpected visit from one of the board members at my doorstep. He wore a calculated smile, but his eyes held a flicker of menace that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to talk about the decision you made at last night's meeting," he began, his tone deceptively friendly. As he spoke, I quickly realized this was not a discussion, it was a veiled threat. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice as if sharing a deep secret. "You know, if you continue to resist our plans, we might have to consider placing a lien on your property. You wouldn't want to lose everything you've worked for, would you?" The implication hung heavy in the air. My heart raced as the weight of his words sank in. He was trying to intimidate me into submission. The emotional turmoil I experienced in that moment was overwhelming. I was used to navigating challenges with ease and confidence, but this felt personal. How could they justify tearing apart my family's legacy over a whim and a poorly explained clause? Nevertheless, I refused to let fear paralyze me. Instead, it lit a fire within me, a determination to not only protect my property but to stand up against their bullying tactics. I knew I had to act decisively. Gathering my thoughts and summoning all the courage I could muster, I reached out to my family's legal team that afternoon. I recounted the details of the meeting and shared the threats made by the board member. Their reaction was immediate. They expressed outrage at the HOA's intimidation tactics and assured me they would help build a solid defense. With my legal team engaged, I began documenting every interaction with the HOA, from the notice claiming part of my backyard as community property to the recent threats made against me. This meticulous record-keeping fortified my case and transformed what had once been an emotional struggle into an organized plan of action. As days passed, however, the pressure from the HOA intensified. Another board member approached me at local gatherings, suggesting in front of neighbors that my refusal to comply might result in not only liens, but also potential fines for non-cooperation with community initiatives. Each encounter felt like another layer of intimidation intended to isolate me. Yet with each attempt at coercion, more residents began to take notice of how I was being treated. Conversations shifted from casual chatter at neighborhood events to whispers of solidarity among those feeling uneasy about the HOA's aggressive tactics. My resolve only strengthened. I wouldn't just defend my own property rights. I would rally others who felt threatened by this oppressive regime. With support slowly building and fueled by anger against their unethical behavior, I began preparing for what would undoubtedly be a fierce confrontation with an organization that clearly underestimated both my resources and resolve. They may have thought they could frighten me into submission, but they were about to discover just how wrong they were. As the shadows lengthened and evening settled over the neighborhood, I took a moment to gather my thoughts and consider my next steps. The threats from the HOA had sparked a righteous fury within me, and it was time to channel that energy into something productive. My family's legacy wasn't just an inheritance of wealth, it was a lineage of resilience, marked by battles fought and won against corrupt forces that dared to threaten our interests. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of my family's elite legal team. Known for their prowess in high-stakes property disputes, they had a reputation for taking on powerful entities without flinching, a perfect match for the challenge ahead. Timing is everything, just like subscribing to this channel might just bring a stroke of luck when you need it most. But let's get back to how I turned the tables. As the phone rang, I couldn't help but remember stories of my ancestors who stood firm against injustices long before me. Their determination coursed through my veins as I envisioned how I would continue that tradition. When my attorney answered, I wasted no time. "I need your help," I said, laying out the details surrounding the HOA's claims and their recent intimidation tactics. Each word strengthened my resolve. I could feel the weight of their support on my shoulders. "First things first," she replied, her voice steady and reassuring. "We'll need to gather all documentation regarding their claims, the notices you've received, any records of meetings, and especially any evidence of intimidation." Her calm demeanor soothed some of the anxiety that had flared up again since the visit from that board member. As we spoke, I learned more about how we would proceed. They advised me to keep meticulous records of all interactions with the HOA going forward, reinforcing our position should it come down to litigation. The more prepared we were, the stronger our case would be against these bullies masquerading as community leaders. With each passing moment, my confidence grew as I discussed strategies with my legal team, how best to counteract their threats and potentially expose their practices. It became clear that this situation was not simply about protecting my property. It held implications for other homeowners who might also be vulnerable to similar tactics if nothing was done. After our conversation ended, I felt invigorated. Armed with newfound clarity and purpose, I set about organizing my notes from previous meetings with the HOA, gathering evidence that would support our case. My determination transformed into action as I began drafting a cease and desist letter to send to them once we had compiled enough documentation. As days turned into weeks, each interaction with my legal team solidified my resolve further. They began investigating not only the HOA's practices, but also digging into potential links between board members and developers who might stand to gain from this land grab, leading us closer to uncovering a web of deceit lurking beneath the surface. With every piece of information they uncovered, it felt as though we were inching closer to something even bigger than just reclaiming my backyard. It was about justice for every homeowner in our community who deserved respect and fair treatment. This fight wasn't merely personal. It became a movement rooted in integrity against corruption that had festered too long in plain sight. As my legal team delved deeper into the situation, the connections between the HOA board members and a local real estate developer began to emerge like a damning puzzle coming into focus. They worked tirelessly, poring through financial records, emails, and even subtle hints left in public filings. What they uncovered was alarming. The developer had been showering HOA board members with lavish gifts and undisclosed payments in exchange for facilitating their plans to secure land for luxury condominiums. One afternoon, my attorney called me with urgency in her voice. "We have something," she said, clearly excited yet cautious. She explained that they had obtained copies of transaction records showing payments made to several board members shortly before they decided to seize ownership of my property. The timing was too coincidental. It was a clear pattern of corruption unfolding right before our eyes. With each new finding, I felt a mix of anger and vindication. Anger at the deceitful tactics employed against me, and vindication knowing I had not been paranoid about their intentions. My family's legacy was at stake, but now we had tangible proof that could turn the tide. We began gathering documentation for a potential case against both the HOA and the developer, fortified by a growing sense of purpose. Additionally, as part of our investigation, we interviewed some residents who had previously served on the HOA board. Their testimonies painted a picture of an organization increasingly buckling under pressure from outside influences, individuals willing to sacrifice community integrity for personal gain. One former member disclosed that there were discussions about funding various community projects, but many were left questioning how these projects would really benefit anyone other than the developers. Determined to strengthen our position further, my legal team filed Freedom of Information requests regarding any public contracts or communications between the HOA and the developer. The moment I received confirmation that our requests were being processed filled me with anticipation. Each piece of evidence we collected added another layer to our case that would expose this web of corruption. As I reviewed various reports and documents sent over by my attorneys, I realized that what started as an effort to defend my property had grown into a significant investigation into malpractice affecting all homeowners in our neighborhood. We were not just fighting for my backyard anymore. We were confronting an entrenched system that rewarded greed over community welfare. Before long, local news outlets caught wind of what we were uncovering. The rumors about bribery within the HOA began to circulate among residents eager for change. As coverage spread across social media platforms and local news stations reported on our allegations, more residents came forward to share experiences they'd endured at the hands of board members who had lost sight of their original purpose. The momentum shifted dramatically. It was no longer just my fight, it had become ours. Empowered by this sense of solidarity, I knew we had struck a chord within our community. People were no longer afraid to stand up against intimidation. They wanted justice as much as I did. The pieces were falling into place, Soon enough, those who sought to take advantage of us would find themselves facing consequences for their actions. With the evidence of corruption mounting and support from the community strengthening, it was clear that the time had come to launch a decisive legal counterattack. My legal team moved quickly to draft a cease and desist order aimed at both the HOA and the developer, asserting my rights to my property and demanding an immediate halt to their unjust actions. It was not just about protecting my backyard anymore. This was a strategic maneuver to put them on notice that I would not back down. The day I signed the cease and desist order was almost surreal. I felt a mix of determination and exhilaration wash over me, a sense of power in taking control of a situation that had spiraled out of my hands. Once the paperwork was filed, my attorney arranged for it to be personally delivered to both the HOA president and the developer. I wanted them to understand that their attempts at intimidation would no longer go unchecked. As news of my actions spread through the neighborhood, the mood shifted dramatically. What had once felt like a lone battle transformed into a collective awakening. The residents who had been too intimidated to speak up began expressing solidarity, many eager to join me in this fight against what they now recognized as systemic corruption. That very evening, we organized an emergency neighborhood meeting where I revealed our findings and outlined the actions we were taking to reclaim our community's integrity. In the days that followed, as media coverage erupted surrounding the posted cease and desist order, more residents reached out to share their experiences with similar intimidation from the HOA. This newfound unity fueled our legal strategy even further, revealing patterns of misconduct that extended beyond just my own situation. As we prepared for battle, my legal team meticulously crafted an updated case file. This wouldn't simply be about defending my property rights. We aimed to hold accountable those who had abused their positions for personal gain. The evidence we had gathered laid a strong foundation for potential lawsuits against the HOA for negligence and breach of duty, as well as against the developer for his underhanded tactics. With each passing day leading up to our hearing, I found myself engaging in heartfelt conversations with neighbors who shared their stories over coffee or during walks in the park. Our community began to bond over this shared experience of betrayal and significant stakes. Many feared they would become victims too if we did not stand together. Finally, we stood in front of the judge, not just as one homeowner seeking justice, but as a united front representing dozens of homeowners threatened by the very board meant to protect us. My attorney presented our case with confidence, articulating our grievances while highlighting the unethical dealings between the HOA and the developer. The air in the courtroom was electric, charged with anticipation and emotion. I could feel my pulse quicken as I looked at my neighbors, hope mingling with resolve on their faces. We were ready for this fight. It was no longer just about reclaiming my backyard, but about restoring faith in our community's governance and ensuring that those who acted with greed would face consequences for their actions. And as I took a deep breath, I knew this was just the beginning of our journey toward justice. As the cease and desist order gained traction, local news outlets quickly picked up on the unfolding story, illuminating the scandal that had taken root in our community. Journalists swarmed to cover not only my fight, but also the broader implications surrounding the HOA and its dealings with a corrupt real estate developer. Coverage ranged from investigative pieces detailing the bribery allegations to human interest stories highlighting the sentiments of residents who felt betrayed by those meant to protect their interests. One afternoon, I received a call from a prominent reporter at the local news station, eager to interview me about my experiences and the unfolding litigation. The excitement in her voice was infectious, and I knew this was an opportunity to raise awareness. During our conversation, I recounted not only the pushback I'd faced from the HOA, but also how many neighbors were uniting against their manipulative tactics. She seemed particularly intrigued by the allegations of corruption tied to both the developer and various board members, vowing to give the story the coverage it deserved. When that segment aired, it became an instant hit, sparking public outrage and flooding social media with discussions around HOA governance and community rights. Neighborhood groups began sharing links to the story, urging others to watch and engage. People took to Twitter to express their indignation, using hashtags like #StandWithUs and HOA corruption to rally support for residents fighting against unethical practices. The collective frustration ignited a firestorm of debate about transparency and accountability in homeowners, associations throughout the region. Within days, I noticed a palpable shift in public opinion. People who had once been cautious or fearful of speaking out began voicing their support more openly. Residents recalled stories of intimidation similar to mine. Those who felt squeezed by HOAs desperate for control started sharing their grievances with me, emboldened by the exposure given through local media. Our neighborhood meeting soon transformed from a mere gathering into a community forum filled with energy. As more attendees shared their experiences with unsavory HOA tactics captured by reporters, laughter mixed with anger fueled a sense of camaraderie that had been dormant. Neighbors committed not just to stand behind my fight, but to educate one another on their rights concerning HOA governance. Inspired by influencers locally and nationally who advocated for fair housing practices and civic engagement, more residents stepped forward as advocates for integrity within our community's governance structures. They started organizing peaceful demonstrations outside the HOA office, carrying placards demanding accountability from board members, while petitions circulated calling for reforms within contractor agreements made with developers. In an astounding twist of fate, our community's newfound visibility caught the eye of larger media outlets looking for stories that highlighted grassroots movements challenging corruption. Reports from national news networks followed close on the heels of our local coverage, a testament to how deeply this story resonated beyond neighborhood borders. With each passing day, my actions had ignited a broader movement within our community, a fight that transcended my individual struggle for property rights and aimed straight for establishing justice against systemic corruption. As I prepared for our upcoming court hearing, I couldn't shake off a sense of empowerment from witnessing this extraordinary transformation unfold, knowing that together we were no longer victims, we became warriors for change. The courtroom was charged with tension as the legal showdown unfolded. Flanked by my legal team, I took a deep breath and focused on the scene before me. The judge, a seasoned professional with a reputation for fairness, surveyed the room, and it was clear that both sides understood the stakes involved. Around us were not just attorneys, but neighbors, reporters, and spectators drawn in by our battle against the HOA's corruption. As my attorney began presenting our case, she laid out the foundation of evidence we had meticulously gathered over weeks of investigation. A series of documents were displayed for all to see, emails detailing bribes exchanged between the developer and board members, financial records tying large payments to votes that benefited the developer's interests, and testimonies from residents bravely willing to share their experiences. A palpable hush fell over the courtroom as my attorney began reading excerpts from the emails aloud. Each word felt like a hammer striking an anvil, resonating not only within the confines of the courtroom, but also in the hearts of those who had been affected by the HOA's practices. "This is not just about land, it is about trust," she asserted, locking eyes with the judge. Her words hung in the air, igniting sentiments among residents who had long felt powerless against unaccountable authority. The opposing counsel rose next, attempting to discredit our findings by framing them as circumstantial. He argued that such payments were mere business transactions typical in disputes involving property development. Despite his slick presentation, it was clear he was floundering. He lacked evidence to refute our claims of corruption effectively. He leaned heavily on character attacks against me and other residents who testified, but that only further alienated him from a community that had rallied around moral integrity. In a particularly gripping moment, a former HOA board member took the stand. As he recounted his experiences of being pressured to approve questionable contracts and the fear of reprisal for dissenting voices, murmurs rippled through the audience. His voice trembled not with cowardice but courage. The raw honesty that permeated his testimony struck a chord, a collective realization that our fight was not merely individual but emblematic of something far larger, the fight for accountability in governance. As the day wore on and evidence continued to mount against the HOA and developer, I could sense a growing confidence within the courtroom, an unmistakable shift toward justice. Witness after witness spoke out against intimidation tactics and fraudulent practices that had plagued our community for years. With each account laid bare before the court, it became increasingly clear that we were standing on solid ground. By the end of our presentation, as my attorney concluded with a powerful appeal for justice and integrity within community governance, I felt a rush of hope wash over me. The judge listened intently, nodding at times in acknowledgement of powerful testimony. With tensions running high and public sentiment favoring our case, I could almost envision a triumphant moment when we would emerge victorious, not just for myself, but for everyone in our community who desired accountability and ethical leadership. This was not merely about reclaiming my backyard anymore. This was about shaping a future where transparency prevailed over greed. As I left the courtroom that day, bolstered by support and armed with truth, I knew that regardless of how this chapter unfolded, we had ignited a movement that could never be extinguished. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the day of reckoning arrived. Tension filled the air, heavy with the scent of justice about to be served. Just days after our compelling presentation, word had spread that law enforcement was preparing to act on the evidence we had uncovered against the developer and the HOA president. The moment felt electrifying, as everyone present understood that this was more than just a legal battle. It was a turning point for our community. As the doors swung open and the judge took his seat, a ripple of energy coursed through the room. My attorney had informed me that law enforcement would arrive shortly to execute their warrants. I could hardly contain my nerves, yet at the same time, an exhilarating sense of empowerment surged within me. This was the culmination of months of struggle, a fight that had drawn in so many from our community, and now it was time for accountability. The preliminary proceedings unfolded smoothly, as our legal team stood poised to reiterate our case against the HOA and developer. However, all eyes turned when the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridor. Everyone knew what was coming. In walked a group of uniformed officers, their presence commanding immediate attention. With them were both the HOA president and the developer, looking visibly shaken and out of sorts as they faced the consequences of their actions. The officers stepped forward, reading aloud the charges against them: fraud, conspiracy, and corruption. Gasps filled the courtroom as residents absorbed this shocking yet deserved development. It was a pivotal moment that felt like a scene from a drama unfolding in real life, one where justice was finally catching up to those who had wronged us. The HOA president attempted to speak, his voice shaking as he protested innocence, claiming miscommunication and misunderstanding. But his words fell on deaf ears. The mounting evidence collected by our team spoke volumes. The developer, knowing full well the weight of his own actions, remained silent, face pale and drawn, a man backed into a corner with nowhere to turn. With authority, one officer handcuffed each of them as murmurs broke out among spectators, a mix of anger and relief coloring their reactions. This was not just about my fight anymore. It represented everything we had endured as a community: the intimidation tactics, the betrayals, and the struggle for our rights. As they were led away, I felt an overwhelming wave of support from my neighbors who packed the courtroom. The camaraderie forged over these trying months solidified in that moment. I could see many residents wiping away tears, tears of hope rather than sorrow, as they realized that their collective strength had made an undeniable impact. Once the courtroom settled again, my attorney made one final statement outlining our intention to seek full restitution for damages incurred by residents due to these corrupt practices. The judge nodded thoughtfully, clearly recognizing the significance of this case. That day marked a turning point not just for me, but for every homeowner affected by this corrupt regime. With the HOA president and developer arrested, it finally felt like justice was being served, reaffirming our belief in accountability and integrity within our community governance. As I left the courtroom surrounded by neighbors who shared in this victory, I knew we had opened a new chapter, one filled with promise and renewed hope for what lay ahead. In the wake of the arrests, our community held a special meeting to decide the future of the HOA. Tension hung in the air as residents gathered, many visibly shaken but imbued with a sense of purpose. It was clear that their voices mattered now more than ever. This was a moment to reflect on how far we had come and what we hoped to achieve moving forward. As I stepped into the meeting hall, I could see familiar faces illuminated by determination. Our experiences bind us now, and they had grown tired of living under an oppressive regime that had ignored their rights for too long. The atmosphere buzzed with conversations filled with anger directed at those who had deceived us, but also an overwhelming sense of unity as neighbors exchanged stories and shared their visions for our community's future. The president of the HOA sat silently among us, looking defeated and disheartened after all that had transpired. No longer did he hold power over us. Now he was just another attendee witnessing the collective resolve that silence could no longer overshadow. When it was my turn to speak, the room fell silent. I felt the weight of everyone's expectations upon me, a mixture of fear and hope hanging in the air. We've faced intimidation tactics, corruption, and broken trust. I began, my voice steady yet impassioned. But today is not just about holding those accountable for their actions. It's about reclaiming our homes and ensuring ethical governance moving forward. Eager murmurs rumbled in agreement throughout the crowd as I outlined our options. A reform in how the HOA operated or taking dramatic steps to dissolve it altogether. Calls for dissolution quickly turned into vocal support when one neighbor rose to share how much money had been wasted on needless projects without consent from residents, while others spoke out against similar inequities they faced under HOA rule. With each story shared, it became abundantly clear that trust could never be restored as long as this corrupt structure remained intact. Momentum built until someone eloquently articulated what many were feeling. Dissolving the HOA entirely would allow us to establish a new path governed by transparency where community members could actively participate in decisions affecting our neighborhood. As we took a vote, a symbolic gesture signifying our collective will, I felt my heart race. Each raised hand echoed our commitment to change. When it became evident that we had garnered overwhelming support for dissolution, cheers erupted in unison. Laughter mixed with tears that embodied relief washed over those present. That night marked a definitive turning point where healing began and hope flourished within our once divided community. We vowed to form a new coalition, one rooted in participation and respect, where every homeowner would have a voice in decisions shaping our neighborhood's future. As I left that meeting arm in arm with fellow neighbors who had become both friends and allies through this journey, I felt an undeniable pride rise within me. The victory wasn't just my own. It belonged to all of us who fought back against corruption and created lasting positive change together. Today was not merely an end, but a bright new beginning for all homeowners ready to secure integrity in community governance, the kind capable of fostering shared values instead of hidden agendas. Hope emanated from every face surrounding me as we contemplated a fresh start grounded in accountability, a testament to what unwavering collective action can achieve when people unite towards a common goal. As I reflected on the tumultuous journey that had led us to this pivotal moment, it became clear how deeply intertwined wealth and influence can impact power dynamics within a community. Our struggles against the HOA illuminated the dangerous potential for corruption that exists when a select few wield power without accountability. The events we experienced served as a stark reminder that vigilance is essential. It is easy for authority to slip into authoritarianism when left unchecked. I recognized that while my family's resources allowed me to fight back aggressively against the HOA's tactics, it was ultimately the collective strength of our community that turned the tide. The success we achieved was not simply due to my financial backing or legal prowess, but rather a unifying force among neighbors who had been emboldened by shared experiences and a desire for fairness. The realization that ordinary citizens could band together to confront malfeasance demonstrated the power of solidarity in combating corruption. Throughout our fight, I witnessed firsthand how many felt powerless against an institution that should have been serving them. The HOA's intimidation tactics had silenced many voices, leading to a culture of fear and suspicion that pervaded our neighborhood. However, when the truth about their corrupt practices emerged, it galvanized our community and transformed fear into action. We learned the importance of coming together, neighbors supporting one another, sharing information, and collectively demanding change, as the key ingredient to effecting real improvement. This experience also highlighted a crucial lesson. Those who occupy positions of authority must remain accountable to the communities they serve. The disbanding of the HOA was not just an end to their reign, it signified a rejection of their oligarchical approach to governance. We chose to forge a path focused on transparency, inclusivity, and ethical leadership, ensuring that every homeowner had a voice in shaping decisions impacting our lives. As we began forming our new coalition, I felt a renewed sense of hope. I realized that true democracy relies on active participation from all members of the community, not just those with wealth or influence. Our movement demonstrated that when individuals come together with determination and purpose, they can dismantle systems of corruption and rebuild them with integrity. Looking forward, I understood that maintaining this newfound empowerment would require continuous vigilance. We needed to remain aware of those who might seek to exploit their positions for personal gain, as well as encourage open dialogue and engagement among residents. The journey we undertook was not only about reclaiming my backyard, it was about establishing a lasting precedent for what genuine community governance should look like. In standing up against corruption and refusing to allow wealth to dictate power dynamics, we reshaped our neighborhood into one where shared values and mutual respect prevailed over greed and manipulation. As I walked through familiar streets alongside my neighbors, now friends, I felt a profound sense of pride in what we had accomplished together. Our victory reinforced the belief that collective action has the power to create meaningful change when fueled by solidarity and resilience. With each step toward rebuilding our community, I remained committed to nurturing this hard-won unity, ensuring that together we could safeguard against future injustices and inspire others to do the same.